Most people think that intuition is bullshit, or that it doesn't exist, or that people who act on intuition or hunches are fooling themselves. Luckily for me, since my career is based on intuition, they are wrong. I'm the vice president of operations at Mexico, the biggest computer and cybersecurity firm you've never heard of. Our clients range from federal agencies to Fortune 500 corporations, and we generate $8 billion a year in sales. My job is to oversee our clients and evaluate potential acquisitions. My job, and I imagine most people's jobs, requires the ability to read clues, sift through large amounts of information, and understand what's important and what's not. Intuition is really about seeing the fuzzy emerging patterns that can be noticed but cannot be expressed in words. I've always been good at this, trusting my instincts, even when I couldn't say exactly how I knew what I knew. And in this way, I achieved great success and impressed many people. I'll give you an example that made me vice president. 2 years ago, we were completing the purchase of a startup company called Adverticon, which made, well, the details don't matter. Back then, I was just a middle manager, supervising the review of their software code and taking part in meetings with their representatives. There was something wrong, something not quite right. In some places where my engineers told me the code seemed too complicated, too nested in itself. And when we discussed this with representatives of Adverticon, their answers were very plausible but not convincing enough. So I leaned out. I went to my boss the day before the deal was supposed to close and said, "Something is wrong here. Give my guys 72 hours to work on the product one more time before you sign." Well, they threatened me, shouted and scolded me, and then they said if this deal falls through, you'll be out of a job. And the Adverticon people got angry and agitated and threatened to back out of the deal and offer everything to Cisco instead. But they didn't. And my boys busted their asses in 2 days and 2 nights, and we discovered a gaping hole in Adverticon's security protocols. So we went back to the table and confused them and then renegotiated the terms. In the end, Mexico did buy Adverticon, but it took another 7 months until they could convincingly prove that they had solved the problem and 18% lower than the originally agreed price. This made me vice president with a significant promotion, and I got a $2 million bonus, which sounds incredible until you think it was only 0.4% of what Mexico saved on the deal. Perhaps the best part of it all, after the money, Lori and I used to buy a gorgeous house in Pacific Palisades with a sensational ocean view, was that everyone now looked at me as Mexico's resident genius. Any proposal I made was heard. Any guess I made attracted people's attention. If I ever needed some time or wanted to go somewhere to look at something or talk to someone, it was, of course, Glenn is all you need. So at 3:17 p.m. on March 8th, when I left my office and headed to the parking lot, telling my administrative assistant that I would be out for the rest of the day, she did not bat an eyelash, but simply replied that she would reschedule my appointments. I would be, and my other assistants probably thought Glenn has another premonition, and so it was. I suddenly realized that my best friend Tom Betancourt might sleep with my wife. Tom and I grew up together in the suburbs of San Diego. We were inseparable from about 2nd grade until we went to different colleges, and stayed in touch after that, even when his commercial real estate job took him far from the West Coast. When Lori and I got married, Tom was my best man, although she had never met him until the night of our rehearsal dinner. Of course, he liked her just as I thought. Why don't you like it? Lori is brilliant and funny, incredibly smart, thoughtful, and loving. It's easy to keep the words flowing from there. As we waited together for the ceremony to begin, Tom said, "Dude, you hit the jackpot. Lori really is something. I almost envy you." I laughed and said, the key word is almost right because Tom was the guy who doesn't take on any obligations and takes everything lightly and frivolously. He loves women as many as possible, and they love him, but he is, to put it mildly, not the type to get married. That night in our hotel room, Lori and I talked about him. We were cuddled together in bed, both quite drunk. We didn't feel the need to formalize our marriage as we had been living together for several months and had sex regularly. So instead we talked about the wedding, the food, the guests, and leaving the next day for our honeymoon to Maui. "What do you think about my friend Tom?" I asked her, and her first words were shocking. "Oh my God, he's great," she said. and then giggled and looked at my face, blushing slightly. I mean, you are the most beautiful man in my world, baby. She kissed me, but Tom, well, if I weren't in love with you, and she paused, kissing me again, perhaps suddenly interested in the fact that she had dug too deep. But I just laughed. I knew how much Lori loved me holding her tightly and tenderly in my arms. I said, I know what you mean, baby. He's tall and broad-shouldered, and he has such a charming manner and such a tempting smile. He's always been like that. A magnet for girls, mostly, and I bet he's lying in bed right now with one of his bridesmaids or someone else he met at the reception, as he usually does. Lori laughed and said, I can guess. Emily or Kate. Did you see how they looked at him throughout lunch and when he made his toast? It wouldn't require much effort on his part. And that was it. We fell asleep, and the next day we flew off for our honeymoon. And then we came back and lived happily ever after. For 3 years and 9 months, give or take, until March 8th. Tom arrived, staying with us for a few days, maybe a week. He was working on a big project in Los Angeles, and although, of course, he could have afforded Beverly Wills' share or Viceroy Hermitage, for us it was an opportunity to catch up. We hadn't seen each other since the wedding, so he flew in on Friday night, and we went to the Lakers game and played golf over the weekend, and on Monday he went downtown to close the deal while I went to work. He had meetings scheduled until 4 o'clock, and I promised to be home by 6:30 so we could have lunch on the back porch and look out over the Pacific Ocean. Everything is fine, right? It's great to be with my older friend and share some good times with him and Lori. Except that on Monday, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the alarm bell rang. It can't always be explained. You just know it. The way they moved around each other, the casual glances, a few minutes of nervousness between Lori and I last night before we went to bed, and again in the morning. Was he going to have sex with her? I wasn't sure. Can this happen? Damn right. And so at 15:17 I headed to the parking lot. Traffic was normal in Los Angeles, and I arrived home just before 5 p.m., more than half an hour after Tom was expected to return. I parked around the corner and walked leisurely along the long driveway, apparently hoping that my intuition was wrong this time. But that was not the case. There was no one on the back porch in the living room or in the kitchen, but I found them easily enough as I quietly walked up the carpeted stairs and down the hallway. The door to the master bathroom was wide open and they were both naked. Tom stood with his back against the wall, and Lori knelt in front of him near the bathtub and pleasured him. I once saw a photo on the internet with the following title. She told him that her husband trusted her and she loved him, and did not want to betray this trust. He replied that he understood everything and would respect her boundaries and give her some time. He was in a surprisingly understanding mood, but after a few hours he decided that he wanted her to caress him, and that was the end of it. Everything was practically the same here. I was about 3.5 meters away. None of them could see me. For some reason, I didn't rush in, scream, or hit. I stood still and watched. My wife has the most beautiful ass I've ever seen, and I admired it as she lovingly pleasured him, clearly enjoying what she was doing. She placed her hands on his hips, and Tom's hand pressed softly to the back of her head, guiding her. I stood still, and Lori caressed him, and Tom moaned and enjoyed the process. I was horrified, furious, absolutely frozen by what he saw. Lori was so sexy, and it was so easy to imagine the pleasure Tom was experiencing. I didn't move. Finally, Lori stopped petting Tom, and he carefully lifted her to her feet, and holding her in his arms, he kissed at her, and she opened at her mouth and gave herself to him, moaning, while he held her with one hand and stroked her with the other. In less than a minute, she shuddered and screamed loudly. She was clearly very excited. After that, he held her a little longer, and they kissed some more, and then she said, "You're actually a son of a bitch, you know that? I told you I would never cheat on Glenn." He kissed her again. I could say, "I'm sorry, Lori, but I won't. Glenn is my friend and I love him. But when I saw you on the deck yesterday in that bikini, I could hardly resist leaving you and having sex with you right there. So instead you came to my house today, pulled me into the shower with you, and then forced me to final you? Is this really better?" The words might have sounded like a complaint, but Lori was still in Tom's arms, still smiling at him, still stroking his chest with her hand. "Well, that's a little better," he said. "We didn't actually have sex with you." Finally, she pulled away from him. When she took the clothes and went into the bedroom, I silently left the house and returned to my car. I can't explain what I did that night. Not what you would expect, that's for sure. I felt disgusted and sick and ready to kill the two people I loved and trusted more than anything in the world. But I drove around for a while with a million thoughts in my head, and then I came home and played the owner and loving husband. Tom and Lori both gave pretty cool performances, although it was easy for me to see that she was a little tense. Tom was ordinary. What a damn actor. I cooked a barbecue and we drank and dined on the veranda, chatted about nothing, drank a nice bottle of wine, and pretended all was right with the world, except I was torn between rage, despair, and lust. Around 10:15, I couldn't take it anymore and said, "Well, that's it. I've had enough. A hard day at work, I'm going to bed. Why don't you come with me, baby?" Lori had no choice. So we said goodnight to Tom and headed to the bedroom. I explained without much conversation that I wanted to make love to her, and insisted, despite clear signs of her reluctance until she got on the bed on all fours, and I stood behind her and had sex with her. I don't know if she was pleased, but I didn't care. She was quieter than usual. But that could have been because she didn't want Tom to hear us. I had rough sex with her, but didn't last that long. I was pretty reserved. After that, we brushed our teeth and snuggled together as usual. I had a feeling she might have wanted to ask what came over me, but was afraid to bring it up. A few minutes later, she fell asleep, and I lay next to her with my eyes open. I looked at the dark ceiling and thought about the next day. In the morning, the three-way charade continued. We had a cheerful breakfast, chatted about nothing, and planned to go to dinner in the evening. And then I kissed Lori and walked out the door. I turned the corner, parked, and walked back toward the house through the trees, finding a spot just outside the kitchen window where I could hear and see them. "Well, I have to go make some money," he said. She stood with her back to him as she rinsed dishes and placed them in the dishwasher. Then he said, "Looks like Glenn had pretty good sex with you last night." She turned and looked at him, blushing. "I don't want to talk about it, Tom." "Well, my appointments should be over by 4, and I'm going to have even better sex with you this afternoon." "No, Tom, we can't." But he came up and hugged her, kissing her deeply. She did not reciprocate, but allowed him to do so. And when he released her, a worried expression appeared on her face. He patted her on the cheek, smiled widely, and said, "Yes, we can." And he grabbed his briefcase and went outside to his rental car. I waited until 10 minutes after he left. I then called my office and told Amy I wouldn't be there that day and spent some time at the beach in Malibu. I walked along the sand, grabbed a shrimp sandwich and a Coke for lunch, and walked around some more. And by 3:30, I was back home safely parked a couple of blocks away, watching the road from behind a couple of trees. When Tom stopped, I quietly ran to my car and drove right behind him so they didn't have more than 3 or 4 minutes. I put on a performance, loudly entering the door. "Hey, surprise! I'm early today!" They were in the kitchen, but not nearby. Tom looked the same as always. But Lori was perhaps a little disheveled and slightly flushed. I pretended not to notice it. We had a drink, made dinner reservations, showered and changed, and then went out and had some incredibly good Asian food at this new trendy place. Don't even get me started that Los Angeles doesn't have the best restaurants in the U.S. And while Lori and Tom were looking at some TV star on the other side of the room, I quietly threw Ambien into her wine. When we got home, she was almost asleep. "Darling, I don't know what happened to me, but I just can't keep my eyes open." I smiled and helped her climb onto the sofa, and 10 minutes later, she passed out. I smiled at Tom. "Help me carry her upstairs and put her to bed, okay? And then we can have a glass on the veranda before bed." We carried her together, took off her shoes, laid her on the bed, and I covered her with a blanket, not bothering to take off my skirt and blouse. On the way down, I let Tom walk ahead of me, and when we were 4 steps from the bottom, I raised my leg and kicked him as hard as I could, right in the back. Tom flew, hit his head hard against the wall, and fell onto his back in the hallway, his eyes slightly unfocused. I jumped behind him and pressed my foot firmly against his neck. "Can you hear me, bastard?" I hissed at him. I watched as his expression changed from stunned, annoyed, a little shy, to worried. My foot was pressing on his larynx, and in my right hand I was holding a large wrench. "Glenn, he began, and then stopped when he felt more pressure from my leg. "No damn thing you say to me matters. You have 3 minutes to throw your shit in your suitcase and get out of here." And if I ever see you again, you better have a gun because I'm going to fucking beat you to death. I stepped back and he slowly rose to his feet, groaning and watching me carefully. He then turned and walked into the guest room, appearing a couple of minutes later with a suitcase and briefcase. I still had the wrench in my hand as I held the front door open and watched him load his things into the car. Before he got into the driver's seat, he said, "Look, Glenn, I really just leave." I waited until his car was out of sight. Then I turned and went into the house. I made myself a drink and sat alone on the veranda for almost an hour, sipping it and watching the stars. I guess I could say thought, except I'm not sure I really thought much about it. I then went upstairs and pulled Lori out of her clothes and put her in the bed and then climbed in next to her. Surprisingly, after a few minutes, I went out like a light. I was sitting on the veranda with my coffee when Lori came out. She put on a beautiful blue nightgown. "Sorry, honey," she said. "I don't know what happened to me last night. We had such a nice dinner and I don't know, felt exhausted." "That's good, baby." I carefully lowered her to my knees and hugged her. "Tom and I carried you to bed." A few minutes later, she came out to get some coffee and start breakfast. When I came in, she said, "What do you want this morning, maybe eggs? And what do you think Tom would like?" "Oh, he had to leave last night," I said. She looked at me in surprise. Someone from management called him and he headed straight to the airport. I think he had an overnight flight to New York. He asked me to say goodbye and thank you for everything. It was fun to watch her face. Obviously, Lori didn't know how to react. Finally, she simply said, "Okay, at least we had a few days with him." "Did you enjoy his visit?" "Of course," I said. "And you?" She looked away. "I think yes. I mean, he's your friend, not mine." "Actually," she continued, "I'm glad he left. I like being together." And she came up, hugged me, and kissed me. After breakfast, I got up and took a shower. When I finished and was drawing myself, I shouted, "Lori, can you come here, baby?" When she came into the bathroom, I was standing naked, exactly where Tom was. She just looked at me, confused, and I said, "Come here for a minute." I took her nightly by the hem and lifted it up, and then he gently pushed her to her knees next to the bathtub. "Well," I said, "why don't you caress me now?" She looked at me for a long time, and I looked at her in return. And then her eyes filled with tears. She lowered her head and began to cry, sobbing heavily, burying her face in her hands. And I just let her watch me. And when she finally started to calm down, she looked up at me with a wet face and said, "Oh, dear Glenn, I'm so shh," I said. "Don't say anything." And I carefully pulled her head towards me. She moved forward hesitantly, tears still flowing from her eyes, and then she began to caress me as she had not done before. She caressed me slowly and lovingly. She did not stop looking at me without stopping crying, until finally she made me throw out everything that had accumulated. And when I pulled her to me and hugged her, just like Tom had hugged her, she started sobbing again, shaking, and it was another 10 minutes or so before she calmed down, before we both calmed down, standing in the bathroom on mat. "I don't know," I said. "Actually, I have no idea." We sat on the veranda an hour later. "I know I love you and I know that I want to stay with you, but I don't know if I can. Will I be able to leave in the morning for work or on a 3-day business trip without wondering who else will want to have sex with you and take you away from me?" She looked at me with red eyes. "I'm really sorry," she whispered, probably for the 20th time. And then she added in a stronger voice, "Nothing like this has ever happened before. Nothing. It was Tom. I don't know. Yes, he's great." I said, "He's a sex god and all the women want to sleep with him, and you're no different from the rest. It doesn't matter that you're married and he's my best friend, right?" I felt myself getting seriously angry again. I got up, grabbed the keys, and left the house. I drove aimlessly and did not return until late in the evening. It took the better part of a year to put everything back together again. A year of awkward silence, explanations and apologies, cold glances, angry accusations, and downcast eyes. I didn't leave her. I didn't hit her or threaten her. In fact, we never even stopped having sex. But it was damn wrong. No more intimacy, no more loving looks and kisses, no words of love, no feeling of safety together. And there was no magic in the fact that things got better. It just took time. Lori found a therapist to work on her problems. For a long time, I wasn't interested in hearing what she found out. but after about 4 months, we talked a little about it. It seemed to help her. But I can't say that everything she told me was very helpful. About 2 weeks after I threw it away, Tom sent me a letter. I thought about just throwing it in the trash and then threw it in my desk drawer. I read it a few weeks later. He was sorry that he was selfish and irresponsible. He treated Lori the same as any other woman he was attracted to. It was all his fault. She was a good woman and adored me. He hates the idea that he damaged our marriage. I handed the letter to Lori and said, "You might want to read this," and then he left the room. Later that day, I saw the letter crumpled in the trash can. Actually, somehow imperceptibly, I felt better. I remember walking into the house one day during lunch right after a busy day at work, and I really wanted to see Lori and tell her about it. And I realized that the anger that I carried inside me, the desperate anger and the desire to somehow harm her, had largely disappeared. The days of coming home every evening with clenched teeth seemed to have quietly ceased. So we had a few weeks of improvement, and then, as the holidays approached, the situation worsened again. I was tense again all the time, wandering around with an angry expression on my face and dark thoughts in my mind. And Lori looked scared. After several days of this and an almost silent dinner, I said, "Sit with me in the living room." She sat there looking wary, preparing for the worst. And I said, "I want you to listen, and I don't want you to say anything. I especially don't want you to laugh, smile, or give me, damn it, a loving look or understand your words. Do you understand?" Lori nodded. She looked like she could barely breathe. After a long minute, I said, "That day when I saw you in the bathroom with Tom, I thought I was going crazy. I didn't know what to do and what to do. What to do with you because you are my beloved wife. And he is my longtime best friend." I watched her. She sat very quietly. We talked about this for the first time, about the fact that I saw them. I hate forgetting what I saw. I fucking hate it. I wanted to kill you both, beat you or strangle you to death. I was so hurt, so scared. I've thought about it 1,000 million times since then. You have the most beautiful body I've ever seen, and here you are standing in the bathroom with Tom, and you are caressing him so hard and passionately, taking great pleasure in giving him pleasure. I cannot forget this, and I cannot forgive this. I saw it. I got so excited. It's not that it turns me on thinking about you with other men. It was you to see you so beautiful, so excited and not with me. But I wanted you and only you because I love you so much and wanted to be with you always, all my life. I stopped for a while, and then he said, "If this means that there is something wrong with me, then get out of my life forever. I don't want to be with you anymore, so be it." She didn't move or change her facial expression. I got up and left. The next 2 nights I slept in the guest room. We were practically silent with each other, and then on the 3rd night, Lori cooked a very nice dinner and served an unusual wine that we both especially liked. "I'm so grateful for what you told me, Glenn, and I hope that since this happened, it's a good sign because you started to feel a little better to trust me a little more." I nodded. She said, "Did this bother you?" I looked away and nodded again. Lori came and knelt in front of me, resting her head on my lap. We sat like that for several minutes in silence. Then she raised her head. "There's nothing to be embarrassed about," she said. Her voice was surprisingly strong. "I'm the only one who screwed up." "Well," she said with a grimace, "Tom was there, but I am the one you married, the one who made the promise. This is on me, and I will never stop regretting what I did, and I'm so sorry that I hurt you." She stood up, took my hand, and led me to the stairs. "Go and make love to your apologetic wife, Glenn. Don't just have sex with me, make love to me and let me show you how much you mean to me. We made love and it felt good. It was more than damn good. I'm not done being angry, or suffering, or even suspecting almost, but my gut told me, we'll figure it out. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.